But yeah, so welcome back. Today is March 17th. It's good to have you all here today. I am sure.
Where's your green?
I am sure because I know you are all here. March 17th, we are all here today, of course, to celebrate St. Gertrude's Day. Wait, you guys?
She's a
Wait, is there?
patron saint of gardening.
She? Wait.
And cats.
Wait. She is the patron saint of cats, the recently deceased,
Yes.
gardeners, travelers, those with mental illness, and those, wait, I'm not done, those with a morbid fear of mice and rats. So I just like the fact that they put the mental illness and gardening together. I don't know. It is in fact St. Gertrude's Day. Don't be confused. There are actually two St. Gertrudes. This is St. Gertrude of Nivelles, not to be confused with St. Gertrude the Great. I don't know what St. Gertrude the Great is the patron saint of, but today is in fact St. Gertrude's Day. What else is going on today? Well, since you asked, it was on this date, March 17th, in 432, that Patrick was stolen from his home in Great Britain as a 16-year-old and taken as a slave to Ireland, where he stayed for 6 years or so as a slave. He escaped at around the age of 22, went back to England, stayed in England for a few years, was converted, I believe, in Ireland. He came back to Great Britain, stayed there for a few more years, determined to be a missionary to Ireland, went back to Ireland, and ended up dying there, also allegedly on this date, in 461. So now, what about the snakes? Yeah, that's good luck with that. That's there's the rumor that he was supposed to have rid the land of snakes. That is a legend. There's not a lot of truth in it, but he is the patron saint of Ireland, not of cats or gardening. That would be St. Gertrude. Don't get the two mixed up. Okay, so, but yeah, it is. So today is St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day to the Irish among us. Do we have any Irish people? I know on St. Patrick's Day we're all Irish, right? He is, but he's the patron saint of Ireland. He was a missionary to Ireland. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point, though, that St. Patrick is not Irish. Patrick himself was not Irish. He was English. Although I don't know that I would make that point to somebody who is fully Irish. I'm just saying, yeah. I have enough Irish in me to know better than to This is the time of the year where I pull out the pictures of my great-grandmother McNally and go, there it is, there's the Irish in me. Yeah, it was on this date, 432 and 461. So that's how long ago it was. Also on this date, in 1337, Edward, the Black Prince of England, was made Duke of Cornwall. This was the first duchy, or the first dukedom, in England. And of course, we all know Edward, the Black Prince, was probably the greatest prince never to be king. He was like, everything about him was great. Everybody loved him. Everybody thought he was going to be a great king. He was called the Black Prince. He was tremendous in battle. He was the son of Edward III, who had been king for like 50 years, a very long period of time. And he had a lot of brothers, including John of Gaunt. You recognize John of Gaunt. But Edward had one problem, and that is he died before he became king. And so his son, Richard II, became king, as opposed to any of his brothers. So have you heard the War of the Roses? Has anybody heard of the War of the Roses? The War of the Roses all has to do with the fact that Richard II, Edward's son, becomes king, and not any of the other brothers. So one of the other brothers, I forget which one it was, is where the Lancasters come from, and then Richard is where the Yorks are from. And so you have the Lancasters and the Yorks all start because Edward the Black Prince dies. He's not Edward IV, he's just Edward the Black Prince. And then because Edward IV becomes king, and then his kids are the two princes in the tower, Heard of the Princess in the Tower? Those are Edward IV's sons, but it's all that. So yeah, it was on this day that Edward the Black Prince becomes the Duke of Cornwall. On this date in 1756, the St. Patrick's Day was first celebrated at the Crown and Thistle Tavern in New York. The first day, the first American celebration. I don't know when Patrick was not beatified. What do you call it when they become a? Where are my former Catholics in the room? Canonized. Canonized. Okay. So yeah, you become beatified, then you become canonized. So I don't know when he was canonized, but actually we'll talk about beatification in a minute here. But be that as it may, in 1829, today was the final performance of Joseph Grimaldi. Has anybody heard of Joseph Grimaldi? Where are my clowns in the room? Joseph Grimaldi was like the original circus clown. In fact, Grimaldi is to clowns what Houdini is to magic. So if you are a clown, and I mean this in a professional sense, not that whole amateurish stuff that some of us have been accused of. He was the first one to do the whole face paint kind of thing with the smile painted on so he could be seen from the later things, and he was a tremendously well-known clown. And so again, if in England for a long period of time, I don't know anymore, but to be called a Grimaldi was to be called a clown. So, well, who do you think you are, Grimaldi? What are you being the Grimaldi here? But Joseph Grimaldi. So you learn all kinds of great stuff. Now, if any of you ever go on Jeopardy and that's the question, and you win, right here. Remember me. So today in 1921 was the Kronstadt Revolution in Russia. The Kronstadt Revolution in Russia. This was now again the Russian or the communists had already taken over. Lenin is in control, and the Kronstadt Revolution was a sailors' revolution against the communist regime, so to speak. And the importance of that was they were complaining, or their complaint was that the communists had not delivered on their own promises. So that a Kronstadt moment is when you realize that what you thought was going to happen doesn't, or you buy into a certain thing thinking something's going to happen, and then you realize that it's not going to happen. So that sometimes is called a Kronstadt moment, where they bought into to the communist lie at the time, and they said, wait a minute, this isn't working, let's have a revolution. It failed, by the way. It was crushed. But that was on this date in so again, so you think, what was the vocabulary? See the conversation. So today, Mark is going to say, stand up and tell somebody what you learned today. And you can choose between St. Gertrude and patron saint of morbid fear of mice and rats. But Grimaldi, Kronstadt, and of course in 1963, speaking of beatification, Elizabeth Ann Seton. Anybody heard of her?
Yes.
Elizabeth Ann Seton was beatified today. On this date in 1963, she was canonized in 1975. She is the first American-born saint. She is the first American-born saint. Now, I believe...
girls' high school in Chicago.
Yes,
Seton.
It's called Mother Seton? or
Yes,
something?
Mother Seton.
Yeah.
And then my old church is actually Elizabeth Ann Seton.
Okay.
So yeah.
Was that the name of the church? But yeah, so beatified, I believe, is with the first miracle, and then when you get the second miracle, then you're canonized. So I think there's like 3 steps.
So what's her miracle?
I don't know what they were. I don't know what they were. But she was canonized, first American-born saint. Now the first, if I'm not mistaken, she was not the first saint from the United States that was canonized. She's the first American-born saint because Mother Cabrini. You guys have seen the ads for the movie coming out? There's a movie coming out. She was canonized as well for her work in the United States, although she was not born in the United States. So yeah, she's there's a movie coming out that looks good. It looks interesting. Cabrini. Cabrini. And it is the Cabrini of Cabrini Green. That is, Cabrini is one name and Green is, there's 2 people. They named it and combined. the name. I just remember doing this, looking stuff up. I actually looked this stuff. I don't just bring this up off the top of my head. I know you're surprised.
We're sending you to Jeopardy.
Yeah, kind of stuff. But reading about her and suddenly realizing that, all of this stuff that has names on it, you think, oh, wait, there's real people that this stuff was named after, kind of stuff. Like I live in Will County, okay, not DuPage. So I don't know who DuPage is named after, but Will County was named after a salt merchant around the time that the state was became a state. I forget See, I can't remember words like that, but I can remember about the patron saint of the morbid fear of mice and rats, kind of stuff. But yes, so today is St. Gertrude's Day. 2 Corinthians 4, again, Paul's probably his fourth letter to the church at Corinth, only the second canonized one, the second one in the canon, but it's probably his fourth message, his fourth letter to them. And the main idea in this particular book is a defense of his apostolic office. So despite all that the church has gone through, all that Paul has done for the church, both at Corinth, if you remember in Acts chapter 18, he spent a year and a half there. He made 2 other visits. He's made 1 other visit. He's going to make another visit after this that we're, pretty certain of. Excuse me. There's still some issues between people in the church at Corinth and Paul, and a lot of it has to do with the idea of his apostolic office. Well, if you were an apostle, you wouldn't do this. And Paul's, and there's a whole different way of doing that, and we talked about that. Remember the no true Scotsman fallacy, or we could say no true baseball fan. That's the no true Scotsman fallacy is if I say that a no baseball fan in Chicago can like both the Cubs and the Sox. Okay, it just can't be done. You like one and the whatever team is playing the other one, or you can hate them both, but you can't like them both. That's against the rules. And then somebody will say, oh, wait, I live in Chicago and I like the Cubs and the Sox. And then you respond with, well, no real baseball fan. So you're not a real baseball fan. So that's the no true Scotsman fallacy. That's what it's called. No Scotsman does this. Well, I'm a Scotsman and I do it. Well, no true Scotsman does it. So Paul says, I'm an apostle and this is what I do. And somebody says, well, a real Scot, no, or it says, no apostle would do this. And Paul says, well, I'm an apostle and I'm doing this, and whoever this person is, who knows, he might be the ABF leader at the church at Corinth, is saying, well, no apostle, no true apostle would do this. And Paul says, on the contrary, I am an apostle, and here's what I'm doing. Okay, so in chapter 4, beginning with verse 1, he says, therefore. And we all know the old saw. Whenever you see therefore, you see what it's there for. Basically, it just means that it's built on whatever was said previously. Okay, therefore, you don't start a sentence with therefore. Although that would be kind of fun. You really want to throw your kids, you just walk up to them and say, therefore, that's how I talk to Debbie. Because she wouldn't have listened to the first thing I said anyway. So I just start with the therefore, and then she says no, and then that's something she learned at that Moody conference, She used to be so obedient and she used to do exactly what I said, on her way up, I'd say jump. On her way up, she'd say how high. Then she went to the Moody conference and, boy, I tell you.
About fast.
Yeah. She wants to go the 4th time. But no, it's great. It's a great time. So 2 Corinthians in your handout, therefore, 2 Corinthians 4 is built on the previous argument. Okay, what Paul was talking about in chapter 3. And if you remember in chapter 3, is that we are to be continually transformed into the image of Christ. Okay, so in chapter 3, remember we talked how Moses, Paul is making this comparison between himself and Moses. and how Moses got the gospel. And then because Moses had this light, his face was transcendent, he had to wear this veil. And Paul is saying, yeah, now we have this veil, the gospel is veiled, and we're going to come back to that image again. Okay, but because of the gospel, that veil has been removed. Because of Christ's work, because of the apostles' work, that veil has been removed. And we now have the freedom, because of the Spirit, we have the freedom to be transformed into the image of Christ. Okay, so again, that verse in 2 Corinthians 3, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, or there is freedom. That's not a God and country passage. Because, say, oh, great, what we have the freedom to do is to be transformed into the image of Christ. Okay? So therefore, since we have this freedom, since we have this, where do we go from there? Okay? Paul refers to this, therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Okay? So Paul refers to this as a ministry. Now, why do you think he does that? It's an interesting way to any thought? Why do you think he does? Why does he call it a ministry? There's a couple of different ways to look at it. One way to look at it is to just say we have a collective responsibility, to reach the community, to reach our neighbors, to reach our friends, to reach our family, to let the gospel, to let the light shine out. And we'll talk more about that later in a few minutes. But I think another thing is here, again, Paul's constantly going back to who's the we here. This is the earlier conversation we had when we talked about chapter 1. Who's the we here? Okay? So you could look at it and say he's talking about believers in general, but specifically I think Paul is focusing on his own role. That we apostles, we have this ministry to bring it to you. And we don't lose heart. Okay, because we know that God has given us this ministry. Okay, and He has given us this ministry, and now we, the collective church, has this ministry as well. So, rather than losing heart, verse 2, rather, we have renounced several things. We have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. So to effect this ministry, okay, to bring about this ministry of unveiling the truth of the gospel, Paul says, listen, we're not doing it the way these other people that are around Corinth are doing it. Okay, Paul has talked about, one of the things he talked about earlier is like, listen, I didn't let you pay me for my work. And if you remember from 1 Corinthians, he didn't. That's where there's something weird about Corinth that Paul knew that if he let them pay him, they would want to control what he was saying, or somehow they would have some sort of control. And Paul's like, no, I'd rather work for free. Okay, and that's what he does. That's where he becomes the tent maker. Okay, so really it was like, what's interesting about that whole question is when you think about Paul's a tent maker, and we go, oh, okay, that's great. Paul's a tent maker, so pastors should have an occupation, or the bivocational ministry and all that kind of stuff. And that it was something, that there was this big honorable point about it. And I really think when he gets right down to it, Paul just didn't want to be controlled by the church. Was why he did that. So you can imagine what churches would be like if pastors were independently wealthy. Maybe not wealthy isn't the right word, but if they didn't rely on the giving of the church, how the church would be different. And I'm just telling you, having been around churches my whole life, at least since I was 11, there's a lot of discussion about, we need to do this. Well, if you do this, this is every church, not just our church, every church is like, well, this is what I think the Bible teaches. We should be doing this. Well, yeah, but there's a group in our church that's not going to like that. Okay, and we're going to lose them. We talked about the story about Rick Warren last week, about the big giver, and had to basically show him the door. But he says, to effect this ministry, Paul doesn't lose heart. He renounces secret and shameful ways. There's nothing secret. Paul is out there. He's saying, this is what I'm doing. You may not like Paul, but at least he's telling you what he's doing. And reading Paul and reading some of this and looking at having gone through Acts, I don't know that Paul was a warm and fuzzy guy. You know what I'm saying? I think he was probably a cantankerous, hard to like guy. But he was consumed with his mission, you know. He says he renounces secret and shameful ways. He doesn't use deception. Okay, do we do that? I mean, do we kind of, there are ways to tell, and if you have kids, you know this. There are ways to tell kids the truth without, or like the lawyer's way. What's the legal way? The lawyer's way to tell you nothing. Tell you everything. Oh yeah, I'm going to tell you everything. And you just, well, I told you. Well, nobody told us this was going to happen. Yeah, I did. I said exactly what was going to happen. And you just didn't believe me, kind of thing. But we do not use deception. It doesn't distort the Word of God. Okay? Now, Paul is looking here saying, listen, guys, I'm not doing any of this stuff. And I think there's an inherent suggestion that whoever is in Corinth now, whoever this guy is or group is that's causing him some grief in Corinth now is doing just that. Say, listen, I'm not distorting, I'm just telling you what it is. Okay? On the contrary, Paul says, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience to the sight of God. So by setting the forth, on the contrary, Paul sets forth the truth plainly. Now, fortunately, he doesn't say, they didn't translate that word clearly, because again, we've already talked about the clearly rule, that whenever a preacher or a teacher says, oh, this is clear, it's probably not, kind of thing. It's just sort of a way of sidestepping making the point, okay? Well, you could use the word clear correctly. It's been overused so much. To me, whenever I hear clearly, okay, it's not. Just one of those gut reactions. But Paul says, I'm just telling you, this is it. This is what and what effect it has. Paul doesn't really care what the wealthy are doing in Corinth, because you remember that was an issue in Corinth. Again, remember in 1 Corinthians where we talked about some of the people come into the meal with a lot of food, and some people are going hungry. So there's clearly a wealth division going on. So Paul doesn't care, because he's not beholden to the big givers or the small givers or anyone at the church. Okay. He commends himself. That is, put yourself out there. I commend. Say, it results in good feelings to commend something to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. Okay, so again, I'm without blame here. It's basically because of the way I'm without blame here. Okay, but and even if in verse 3, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. Okay, now again, go back to chapter 3, verses 14 through 16, and go back to Exodus 34 through 36. We're back to that whole idea of the veil on Moses' face. Okay, remember that story with Moses' face and the way I'm reading, and again, I had never picked this up before, but the way I'm reading Exodus 36 is that from the time Moses went up on Sinai, from that time on, he always had his face veiled. Okay, always, not just for the 5 minutes afterwards, always. Because the text says the only time he could take the veil off was when he went into the Holy of Holies. I mean, that's another 40 years. He's wearing his veil because the people, and again, the point was that the covenant was broken even before it began. And Paul is saying, okay, there's still this veil over the gospel, but the means are there to remove that veil. Okay, so, and it says they're veiled for those. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. Okay, now if you are one of the big, if you're a diehard Calvinist, you would look at this verse and go, well, hey, here you go. Okay, the gospel is veiled. It is unavailable. You can't see the light. Okay, and so basically one of the, you have. The difference with this is a side note on Calvinism versus Arminianism. what the two differences are. So if you're a Calvinist and an Arminian, it has to do with how the nature of salvation and how it comes to people. So if you're a Calvinist, you believe that everybody is initially lost, okay? Nobody is born a believer. Everybody is initially lost, and certain people, and so everybody is veiled, and that certain people have, God has gone down and said, listen, I'm going to lift the veil for this person so that he or she will receive whatever particular amount of grace they need. And that's the technical term there is prevariant grace, that I'm going to give a certain amount of that, enough that they are going to accept me and be a believer. Okay, and God knows who these people are. If you're an Arminian, you say, the Arminian side over here has says, everybody is veiled, but everybody has that veil lifted to some extent, and everybody chooses whether to keep the veil lifted or not. Okay, that's like the super simplification of it. And there's a spectrum here. Some people, and there's kind of stuff. And so this is, so if you're a Calvinist, if you're a diehard Calvinist, well, there it is. The Bible says it's veiled. Veiled to those who are perishing. And the question is, well, who gets this prevariant grace, or who does God lift lift that veil for? But why? Yes.
Right, back to Moses.
Back to Moses.
So he has a veil. Because he reflected God's glory, he wore the veil because A, it freaked people out. B, it reminded them of their sin. What?
Well, I think it could be both. I mean, he comes back, and we're reasoning from a narrative text,
Right.
so there's no explanation. He came down from the mountain, having been with God, and his face is glowing, and it scares the people. Okay, and I think it scared the people because they realized, hey, he's closer to God than I am. He's really much, much closer to God than I am. And so this is kind of the whole idea that that the covenant was broken before it even began. It's like, forget about approaching God. They don't even want to approach his messenger, kind of thing, without his covering his face.
Well, it would freak you out if you saw somebody's face glowing.
Well, except for Debbie, her face is glowing all the time. She's I'm sorry. Especially when she comes back from these moody conferences. I'm telling you, man. She comes back, I'm like, veil that. Come on, I don't. No, I'm just kidding. We're not getting a commission off of people going. Maybe we should. Maybe that's a little ways to get a little kickback for the church here, sort of thing. But be that as it may. So it says the gospel is veiled to those who are perishing. Why is it veiled? The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Okay, so the gospel is veiled to those who are perishing. This is the result of the God of this age. And he's probably referring to Satan. That's the safe bet.
In my version, the New Living, it says that Satan, who is the God of this world, has blinded the minds of
Okay.
those who don't believe.
That's the safe bet, but he could be talking about something else going on in Corinth. So again, does that make sense? I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying, the God of this age could be the prevailing spirit, could be some movement that's going on, the popular movement in Corinth at the time. Okay. So, where was I? Okay. For God said, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ is Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. Now, so Paul is tying in Genesis 1. So again, Paul is really, in his defense of his own ministry, is putting himself in, dragging in or tying in, dragging in is a bad way to put it, tying in a lot of these Old Testament elements that the same God who said, let there be light, and there was light, and certainly every Jewish believer would have believed that, wouldn't have had an issue with that, is the same God who said, has given us this light now to show us the image of Christ, okay? And he says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay. Of course, if you were here Wednesday, this is what I talked about then. But we have this treasure in jars of clay. Okay, and he's talking about our body. That where is that light? It is inside of us. It is part of our being as believers. Okay, and he's going to elaborate on this in 2 Corinthians 5, where he says, if any man is in Christ, she is a new creation. Okay, which is to me probably the most interesting passage in 2 Corinthians, but we'll have to wait till next week to get to that. Okay, but we have this light within us. And we keep it in these jars of clay, and this is how he describes the human body. Now, which is not, a jar of clay is not, an appealing sounding thing, right? I mean, it's a clay jar,
Well, I always thought of it as fragile, very fragile.
Okay. Yeah. Moldable, breakable, but not necessarily valuable. Not like a golden jar. If you okay, here, I'm going to give you something, and this is the truth of the world. This is the most valuable thing in the world. Are you going to put it in a breakable jar? Are you going to put it in just a moldable, normal, for safekeeping? Forget the whole idea of, well, what's the last place the bad guy's going to look? You think about it. You would put it in a safe place, or if it was something that was valuable to you, you would put it in a nice jar. Okay? I mean, and yet here we have this in these jars of clay. Breakable, fragile, and what happens? So Paul is talking about, we have this light, it's in our body, but we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Okay? Paul's point, so where am I here? Let's see. In 4:6, oh man, I'm way behind here. I'm sorry. This is a result of the God of this age, probably referring to Satan. Paul states here that it's not about me, it's about Jesus Christ as Lord, and Paul is his servant. Okay? And i.e. his messenger, his apostle. Where, again, we have this treasure. So the death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. He goes on. His messenger, his apostle. In 4:6, Paul ties together Genesis 1 with the incarnation. Again, that's where let there be light, and with the incarnation. We keep this light, this treasure, in jars of clay. Paul's point in 7b and following is that Paul could not have accomplished anything of this on his own. He's hard-pressed, but not crushed. This jar of clay is like, okay, it's still, it's perplexed, but not in despair. Okay, I think this is kind of an interesting one. Perplexed. I mean, have you ever been perplexed by the way things work out? That wait a minute, this is not how things were supposed to go. And I think several of the prophetic books in the Old Testament kind of focus on this, like Daniel. You look at the book of Daniel. Okay, so Daniel is written right at the time when, because Daniel is taken as part of the captivity, right? And Daniel sees the destruction of Israel and the destruction of Judah. And this is not how it was supposed to work out. Right? I mean, it's like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be the city on a hill. We're supposed to be the city that brings light. This is in the Old Testament. And yet here we are captive in Babylon. Perplexed. God, how is this working out? But Daniel is able to say, well, it may not be working out the way I understand it, but I'm going to continue to worship the God of our fathers. In Daniel chapter 3, you have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, where the three youth that won't bow down to the king, and they're thrown into the fiery furnace. And the king says to them, hey, you need to bow down. And their reply, which is my favorite verse, we talk about life verses. If I was going to have a life verse, it would be Daniel 3:17 and 18. But their response to the king is that, king, listen, and this is the Stand translation, just so you know. He says, the king says, you need to bow down or you're gonna get thrown in there. And the three say to the king, they say, well, we're not going to bow down. Our God can rescue us from that fire. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down. And I just we're perplexed, but we're not in despair. We can't explain this. We know our God can rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we would rather go in there than bow down, And so Paul is like, throughout the history of the Old Testament, again, part of what the prophets is explaining. Listen, this is why it's not working out for you guys. Most of the time, the people don't listen. But here Paul is saying, we're perplexed, but not in despair. The fact that it's not working out the way we figured it was going to work out doesn't mean it's not going to work out. Okay? Persecuted but never abandoned. This kind of goes back to in John 15. This is where Jesus says, if they hated you, they hated me first. That passage. And in Matthew 28, where Jesus gives the Great Commission and he says, I am with you always. Always is an interesting word there. I'm with you always. Even when the king is going to throw you into the fiery furnace. I am with you always. Okay? He says, we're persecuted but never abandoned. Struck down but not destroyed. And Paul later on is going to give us a list of all the times he's been beaten and imprisoned and he just keeps coming back. Just keeps coming back. It's like the
Energizer Bunny?
Well, I thought about going with the Energizer Bunny. I was thinking more like, who's seen the movie Rocky? The original movie Rocky? Yeah, the original movie Rocky kind of thing, where Rocky just keeps getting knocked down, but he keeps getting back up. And the guy, Apollo Creed, right? It's Apollo Creed? Yeah. Apollo Creed is the Carl Weathers character, right? He's like, I won. He says something to the effect of, I won, but I didn't beat him. Right? Which, of course, sets up for a sequel. But, But he says, and this, I won, but I didn't beat him. And I think that's a great, it may look like the God of this age won, but he hasn't beaten us. Paul's like, yeah, it may look. It may look like the God of this age won, but he hasn't beaten us. Okay. In verses 11 and 12, for we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in our mortal bodies. So then death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. And I think this is kind of making the point, is that through these experiences, through this brokenness, is how the light escapes. When people see how the light in you matters, is when the light matters to others. Okay, so again, it's kind of like, well, how do you do evangelism? Okay, you need to learn this, make this point, and this point, and this point, and people are going to be bowled over, and except Christ. And I think evangelism has more to do with being like a show and tell as opposed to a tell and show. That when people see this matters to this guy, and people notice the weirdest thing. You know, again, I worked with a guy for a long period of time that whenever he swore around me, which he did a lot, he always apologized. I never, ever said to him, Bill, will you stop swearing around me? He just knew because of the fact that I did not swear around him. I save it for a more private, no, I'm just kidding. But, you know, I did not swear about him. He's like, okay, there's something, you know, people just notice that kind of stuff. Okay? Show and tell. They know. And if they don't know, if there is no difference between you in a going through an experience and anyone else going through the experience, well, why would they want anything you have? You know, I'm just, again, I'm not trying to shame anybody, but it's just kind of a, you know, when you look at somebody next door and you say, you know, he's got exactly what I have, why should I adopt his approach to things? You know? So, struck down but not destroyed. Brokenness is how the light escapes. Paul then goes on, it is written, and this is from Psalm 116, I believed, therefore I have spoken. I have believed, therefore I have spoken. So Paul understands how this, and this is why he's saying this. Since we have that same spirit of faith, the same spirit of faith, both the apostles, the church of Corinth, the writer of Psalm 116, we also believe and therefore speak because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you to himself. Remember 1 Corinthians 15? The first letter that we've got from Paul? Okay, so we know that there's a problem in Corinth about the resurrection of the body. We know that there's somebody there that's preaching this over-realized eschatology, this idea that we're not going to be resurrected. And Paul is repeating this here. He's kind of throwing it in. Oh, and by the way, don't forget, we're all going to be resurrected. Okay? So Paul uses this to revisit the truth of the resurrection of the body. All of this is for your benefit so that the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. Therefore, this all results, verse 4:15, in glorifying God. Therefore, in light of all of this, we do not lose heart. You know, we do not lose heart. Okay, so Paul, again, this is the second time in this passage, he says, don't lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away. Okay, so again, outwardly it looks like things aren't working our way. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Okay. So therefore we again do not lose heart. The battle is won out of sight. The battle is being done. There should be a D there. It's being done out of sight. Spelling was not my done out of sight. And despite all outward appearances, we are achieving an eternal glory. There's a benefit to all of this. We may not see it. We may not see it, but it's there nonetheless. So we fix our eyes, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So therefore the key, and this is in my opinion, is to fix our eye not on what is seen, but what is unseen. And this is an interesting metaphor that goes throughout the whole New Testament, certainly. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen, things not seen. Moses in Hebrews chapter 11, the very first time I ever preached in a church, it was on seeing him who is invisible. It was talking about Moses. Moses gave it up because he saw him who is invisible. Okay, which you think, wait a minute, there's a problem there. You can't. And so I think, again, we know in Corinth they've got this wealth thing going. that there's a wealthy contingent there in the church. And we know there's a group of people who think, and again, this was a typical Jewish belief that, and it's a Christian belief too, that, you know, if you're wealthy, if you have ample means, it's because God has blessed you. You're clearly doing something right. Therefore, you are, you know, this is a good thing. And Paul is pointing out that, yeah, this isn't it. It's the eternal glory that matters. It's not focusing on how big your church is, or how big your house is, or how big your whatever is, you know, is. The question is on what is unseen. You know, the eternal glory that's being built up, despite all the appearances that to the contrary. Because what is seen is temporary. What is unseen is eternal. And again, go back to Hebrews 11:27. Now, as true as this is, this I have tried this. It does not work to get you out of fixing the house. I've discovered that, you know, the sink is backing up, and I go, well, you know, it's really just temporary, isn't it? It's not really eternal. Fix the sink, you know. She didn't used to talk to me like that before this Moody conference. She used to be very, I'm kidding. But again, it's like we focus a lot on, you know, the temporary, the transitory, the here and now. And there's an importance to that. There's a lot. You know, Paul talks a lot about, you know, he's got in some of his other, he does not in Corinth, but in like Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians. He has what are called the household codes. Series of here's husbands, love your wives, kids, obey your parents, all of that. You know, there's a lot of that stuff in there, so it's important. But here Paul is telling these guys, you know, you think that being rich or having this power or having this authority or having this big house or having this big meal is what it's all about. He says, it's not. Okay? Paul's point, I think, here at the end of 2 Corinthians 4 is to say, look, you know, I'm winning here. Try to put it in this sense. I'm winning here. You guys aren't. I know you look at me and think I've got no money. I'm cast down. You know, people are against me, but I'm the one that's winning. You guys aren't. Okay? You know, kind of, and Paul says, you know, follow me. Later in another passage, follow me, like I follow Christ. So, all right, any questions on 2 Corinthians 4? Next week we'll get into 2 Corinthians 5. So, all right, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week.